everyone. My name is Brad McDermott. I'm a software engineer at Quorum. Quorum, for those of you who don't know, is a way to run a private permissioned Ethereum network with some additional privacy features that we've added on top. So the topic of today's talk is actually the plugin that we developed to support some of these features for Remix, but I know many of you might not know exactly what Quorum is, so let's start with a basic understanding of that and the problems we're trying to solve. So Quorum is our fork of the Go Ethereum code base, which many of you may know as Geth. We took the Go Ethereum code base, added some features that are beneficial to a lot of enterprise use cases. One of those is permissioning. So in this case, a permission network means that you can control which nodes are allowed to connect and participate in the network. So send transactions, mint new blocks, all that stuff. So for a lot of companies, they're not ready to do everything in the open on mainnet Ethereum. So this gives them an opportunity to use the Ethereum technology, but on their own private network. The second thing we did, proof of work doesn't really make sense in a permission context, mining and stuff like that. So we have a couple other consensus options, Raft and IBFT, which happen to give you faster throughput because you don't need the whole mining process. Finally, we had private transactions within the network. So the network is private itself, but within that you can say certain nodes can see this contract and interact with it and see the state, and other nodes can't. So to illustrate that, let me walk you through a public and a private transaction. So this is just a simple representation of a contract creation transaction. You send it with Web3.js or whatever to your Quorum node, just like you would normally. And just like regular Ethereum, it broadcasts it to the other nodes, put in the next block, and now it's on the chain. So a lot of companies, this is enough for them. They just need a private permission network. But there's other use cases where maybe A, B, and C are all different companies. They want to be able to interact with each other, but they also want to interact with, maybe node A and B want to interact with each other without C knowing about it. So we added that ability. So when you create your contract or send a transaction or whatever, you can add this private for field to the transaction object, and the value is a list of the public keys of the participants of the transaction. So you just add that and send it to the node just like you normally would, but now the node knows that it's a private transaction. So instead of broadcasting it right away, it's going to send it to its private transaction manager, which we call Tessera. So Tessera handles all of the private stuff. So each node is running their own instance of Tessera alongside their Geth node. So the Quorum node sends the transaction to the Tessera instance. It encrypts it using the public keys that you provided in the private for list and sends it to all the participants in the transaction. They receive it, decrypt it, and then acknowledge back to the first node that they have processed it. Oops. So once the original node receives the acknowledgements from all the participants, it will take the original transaction and replace the data with a hash of this encrypted payload, and then send the new transaction back to the Quorum node. So basically none of the original data is there and visible on the chain. There's just a hash for the private participants to know what happened. Then this transaction's broadcast just like any other transaction, and when it's added to the next block and these nodes process it, if they were a party, they will see that that hash is in their private state, and they can run it in the EVM and update their private EVM state. If they weren't a party, they'll just they'll know they weren't a party because they didn't find anything, and they'll just ignore that transaction. So yeah, there's a lot more detail I could go into about that, but that's enough to get an idea for what Quorum does. So just to recap, it's a fork of the Go Ethereum code base, and by fork we mean code fork, not like a mainnet fork. These Quorum networks don't share any transactions with mainnet or any public Ethereum network, but you could and you should add a link to mainnet if it makes sense for your use case. It's just like any other sidechain. Fast permission network. these private transactions that I was talking about among specific nodes in the network. And the best part is that it all works with the standard Ethereum tools. It's just Ethereum under the hood with a few modifications. So Truffle, MetaMask, OpenZeppelin, Remix, Web3j, Web3js, all that stuff should work out of the box. In addition to these Ethereum tools, we maintain a number of tools. So we have this list, and then we have a few more. Quorum Cloud lets you deploy to the various cloud providers pretty easily. We've got a Kubernetes project, Kubernetes with a Q because it's Quorum on Kubernetes, and a bunch more. But the focus of this talk is the Quorum plugin for Remix. So let's get into that. Most of you know Remix, I'm sure. It's an in-browser development environment. It develops smart contracts developed by the Ethereum Foundation, and just like the other tools, it works with Quorum. But there's some limitations when you want to run these private transactions. Oops. So let's go look at Remix and get an idea of how this works. All right, so this is just regular Remix. We're going to look at it with no plugin right now, just the standard plugins. So I'm just going to deploy this simple contract just to remind you of the flow. All this does is set and get an integer that you store. So you compile it as usual, and then when you're ready to deploy, you go to their deploy tab. You can choose their virtual environment, or you could connect to a Geth or Ethereum node this way. Or Geth or a Quorum node this way. But we'll just stick with the VM for now. You deploy, and you can interact with the contract. Great. So this is great, and this works with Quorum as well, but as you can see here, there's only a certain number of fields that you can edit in the transaction metadata. So like account, gas limit, the ether you want to send. So for a while, this has been the most requested, or one of the most requested features, is being able to set that private for value right from the Remix browser plugin development environment. So luckily, last year, the Remix team added third-party plugins. So you can see this plugin list here. All of these add some sort of functionality to Remix. So there's a lot of them. You can take a look later, but we developed our Quorum network plugin. We got a bunch of advice from the Remix team, and we were able to deploy last December. So as you can see, we've got it activated already, and that means it shows up over here. So this is the plugin. The idea was to keep it pretty much, keep the development experiences similar to regular Remix as possible. So you still edit in the text editor, compile in the compiler, do your unit testing. But when it's time to connect to a node and deploy, that's when you come to our plugin. So I've got a local 3-node network running on my machine, and I'm already connected to the first node. So as you can see here, with all the other metadata, we have this private for dropdown. So we have the public keys on the network. This is node 1. We'll do node 1 and 2, and then we'll leave node 3 off of this just to show that privacy is possible. Then we're going to just deploy this contract just like we did before. Except now when you expand it, you can see it's private and it shows the participants. So we're going to just set 111 for node 1. Great. So now let's take a look at it from the second node's perspective. We're going to copy this address so we can connect to it again. Node 2 is running on this port. All right. So we can attach to the already deployed contract using the address, and it connects successfully. We can get it and see that the first value is there, and we'll just set a new value. Great. And now finally, just for sanity check, let's go to node 3 and make sure they can't see anything. So we will attach, and you can see contract does not exist at that address. This is exactly what we want. We don't want it to even know that this contract exists. It can't see the state. It can't do anything like that. And yeah, that's pretty much it. This is the first version, so we tried to keep things simple, keep the developer experience the same, or as close as we could as possible. Some improvements we want to make maybe remember previous networks that you've connected to instead of having to remember all the URLs. This would be a drop-down. I could connect to it. Authentication, so a lot of the Quorum nodes would be protected by some sort of authentication. So we support basic auth if you put the username and password in the URL, but that could be better. We could support maybe OAuth, some other SSO type authentication. The latest version of Tessera actually lets you pre-populate this list. You didn't see it, but before the talk, I pasted in these public keys manually. So it'll pull those automatically with the latest version. And also maybe we can add an ability to like label these public keys. So you don't have to remember that this long base64 string is node 1, this one's node 2, all that. Other than that, just improving the UI, maybe better error handling, that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Oh, so as we're developing these new features, we want to be able to deploy them confidently and not break anything. So actually the Remix team has a great integration test setup where it'll run through in an actual browser, it'll run through the UI. And so we borrowed some of that and used some of their helpers. And let me just show you that really quick. So just run the test. And it connects, adds all the modules, adds our plugin, and basically runs through the whole demo that I just did, except about 5 times faster. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. Any questions? Yeah. So, yeah, so he asked if he needs to use MetaMask, or can use MetaMask, or need to. So MetaMask basically has the same limitations as Remix, where it won't let us add the private for thing. So that's still a limitation, although with that Snaps plugin system, hopefully we can develop kind of the same thing for MetaMask. But yeah, right now you can use MetaMask for sending public transactions, but private you'll need to send it through here. Yep. Great, so that's it for the hackathon. We've got some bounties, so come by our booth on the 2nd floor. Talk to us about that, and you can reach out to us here. Our Slack is at the bottom. We answer all kinds of questions in there. Thank you.